Hey everyone, it's Kevin Oxner, and thanks for joining me here. Today what I want to talk about are capture systems. I really feel like everyone needs an awesome capture system because have you ever had one of those nights where you can't sleep because you have all these ideas floating around in your head and you're all amped up? I know I do that a lot. And that's why I need a good capture system to try and get the ideas out of my head, or just even when tasks are flowing into me, I've got to capture these things, get them onto something tangible, and move on from there. I remember back when I was a kid, and I actually used to have a notepad by my bed, and I even got my dad. I don't know why. I was never allowed to put holes in the walls, but I got to nail a little nail into the wall and hung my clipboard up on it, and then I keep pulling it down. And I write a note and put it back up, and eventually my dad took it away from me because I would just sit there all night and write down cool ideas instead of actually sleeping. So it's awesome to have a capture idea, and it's one of the things that I think most people are going to see huge benefits from is if you do get an awesome capture system. Having a way to take care of the high volume of information coming in these days is absolutely necessary. You can't keep track of everything in your head. It just doesn't work anymore. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy about worrying about every detail that's coming into your life. So take a system, find a system. I'm going to show you a million different ways you can bring information in, record it, store it, and make it your own. That's what the key here is, to make sure that you find something that works for you personally, because it may be the best system I have ever created, but if it doesn't work and doesn't fit into your lifestyle and your daily routine, it's not going to work for you. I really believe that there are three types of work. There's creation, implementation, and completion. It sounds pretty simple, but some people will just say, go to work harder, work, and they don't break it down. And I just feel like when I'm working, this is my personal opinion, is that there's three separate phases of work that you go through, where if you focus on one, you can do an amazing job on one, or if you focus on all three for one project, you can do an amazing job on all these things. Here it is. Creation, simple. It's thinking up cool ideas. It's taking the ideas that you have in your head and breaking them down and making them even better and getting them on paper or on a computer or somewhere. Implementation is where the rubber meets the road. That's where you actually have to do some work. So you sit there, you get the work done, you work hard, you're productive, but oftentimes that leads up to the phase 3 of work, which is completion. This is like an area where a lot of people drop the ball. They get 80 or 90% of the way done, and they just go, I made it. And they walk away. They don't finish. They don't put in the finishing touches and the last details. And this is the hard thing. And it takes a special person. Oftentimes, people who are good at completion aren't as good at creation. And if you're good at all three phases of work, you're going places. Something I like thinking about when I look at completion too is when I was training. I was training for a marathon, and we were doing a lot of hill running. And people would run up the hill, and one of the instructors said, always run, 100 meters or several hundred feet past the top of the hill. And it makes a lot of sense, because when you run, what do you do at the top of the hill or near the top of the hill? You're almost there. You're like, I can do it. And then you shut down almost when you're at the top of the hill. But instead, if you carry on past the peak and run a bit longer, you're like, oh man, I gotta stop. Hey, this isn't that bad. And you keep running a little bit more, it takes you past the completion and you feel much better about yourself. The same thing goes for work. I'm trying to relate this to work here, is that you don't want to just go almost to the top and stop. You want to make sure you go wherever you need to go and go just a little bit past that, so that you get in the habit of knowing that you always want to exceed expectations by just a little bit. You don't have to blow people away every single time, but you want to do exactly what you promised and a little bit more as many times as you can. Like I said too, it's awesome if you can do work on one of these phases at one time. I love sitting down and just creating, and I'll create here. All my different projects, I'm just working on creating new ideas and trying to develop new products. Then I'll sit down and I'll work like crazy on one thing, and then I'll work on one thing over here and one thing over here. But I'm implementing some days. That's all I do is just implement. And then I reserve certain days where I just focus in and I just complete things. Because it's an Achilles heel of most people. And some days I have to say to myself, Kev, just finish it. It's 95% of the way done. Get it done. So those are the three phases of work. That's how I've broken them down. I think it's a really, really good assessment. What I like doing is, again, doing one type, reassess and plan. So if I can, my preferred style is to do all my creation. Then I'll sit back and say, okay, what's good here? What can I use? What should I take away from this? And I'll write everything down, and I'll write my implementation plan out in detail. Then I implement, and then I reassess and go, okay, I've got almost all this done. Now, what do I have to do? Just what, to tie a bow on things. What are the finishing touches that I would need to do to make this thing even better? I plan it out a little bit. Boom, I go ahead and finish everything. And just some days I just have to sit down and just do those nitpicky things and make sure everything is perfect before you roll it out. So what I've found is that it's the reason why I want to tell you to do everything in these units of work is because when you get into a flow state, it's like in sports when all of a sudden you're playing basketball or whatever, and you're shooting, you're nailing everything, or whatever you do, you just get into that zone where everything's just flowing and it's just happening automatically. That's the kind of thing we want to try and get you into on a consistent basis. And when you start creating, that flow comes, you're like boom, 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 and you're writing down ideas as fast as you possibly can. The ideas are coming faster than your hand will move, or your fingers will fly across the keyboard. So get into that flow state. Some days you can get into flow state with implementation. You may not think so, but when you're implementing, you're just like, okay, this. Okay, I can take this, move it over here, do these two things, and you just get into this habit of going back and forth and doing everything. Obviously, sequentially. Again, I'm not a fan of trying to multitask things because I don't believe multitasking works, but it's just getting there, putting your head down, and just going for it, and just getting things done. And the completion, for me, that's more of a delicate phase. So I have to sit down and really get my brain in the right phase and just work at it and get all this implementation, all this completion done. So today what I want to focus on is largely on the creation. I'm going to take you from the creation point up to the first evaluation. So we're not going to do an evaluation, but really what you would do in an evaluation is you sit down and you say, okay, what needs to get done now? Can I set out a plan for implementation? And then we go from there. I want to give you some ideas of how I take in information. I've tried, I think, almost every method known to man up to this point. I've got some favorites. I've got some cool ideas, some things you've probably never heard of, some things you may have. I'm going to try and remind you, and hopefully you can go from there and take some of this and run with it. But let's get right into it now, and I want to talk about how you can take this information, how you can take all the information you get on a daily basis and turn it around and make it useful. So the first key you want to have is you want to figure out some sort of system for getting all these ideas out of your head. That's the way to be really creative, is to have some sort of system for getting the ideas out of your brain and onto paper or electronic or some other medium. You want to capture the ideas because oftentimes it's the really cool, it's the amazing ideas that are easily forgotten. You may think, what do you mean? Whenever I have a good idea, it's always perfect. But think about it though. When you have these really neat ideas, oftentimes they come at weird times. Say you're falling asleep, or you're out for a walk, or you're having coffee with someone, and all these times you say, "Wow, what a great idea! I should write it down. I should remember it." And then 2 days later, you say, "Oh, what were the exact details of that idea?" And some of the details, some of the sheen may have come off that idea, or you may have forgotten completely or partially about it. By capturing it in the moment, usually it's the most raw, it's the most basic form of the idea, and then you can work from there. You can work up from there to make sure you have great things that you're creating. But I've done it before where I've had these great ideas and I've forgotten them, and I can't believe that I've forgotten them. And I want to give you a few other ways too, because if you have too many ideas floating around your head, or around in circles, then those new ideas can get lost in the shuffle. So by having a system to get things out, the new idea comes in, and you have more time for your brain to focus on it. And I'm not trying to be all esoteric, all weird and everything on you here. What I'm trying to get across is the point that you've got to have a way to get ideas out and respect your new ideas. Embrace your new ideas. Something that I talk about a lot is a technique called mind dumping. When you mind dump, all you do is you sit down somewhere in front of a keyboard, and I love doing it in front of just a pen and paper and having a big journal out in front of me. And I just write down everything. Absolutely everything. If it comes to my mind, I write it down. Because what you're going to find is that day after day after day, you have the same thoughts or very similar thoughts. If you start writing them down, if you start getting them out of your head, then we say, okay, we understand, we've thought that thought 10 times before. What I want to get across is I want to find some new and better ideas. So it's all about getting the older ideas out of your head, writing them down. And when you record them, when you're doing a mind dump, you record it, and if the same idea comes up a second time, okay, write it down a second time. Don't judge, don't evaluate. It's I wouldn't call it brainstorming, but it's just taking everything you think and putting it on paper. And at first, you're going to have all these ideas milling about in your head, and you're just going to say, okay, this is silly because I'm never going to be able to write everything out. But after you do it for, some people it's 10 minutes, some people it's 20 minutes, some people they go for an hour. After a while, your mind slowly starts to clear, and the clutter drains out of your mind, and you start having opportunities to think bigger and better ideas. So stop rehashing the same ideas over and over again. Putting it on paper makes it real, and start thinking new ideas. That's the key here, is get it out of your head to start thinking new and better ideas. So let's talk about some techniques that you can use to be more effective and more efficient when you've got a system to get things out of your head. I want to go over just 4 simple things you can use that will make things really awesome and get you some better results. The first one I want to talk about is what I like to call daily 21s. I'll throw a link to the bottom here below this video on daily 21s on my website. I think it's a pretty cool system. What you do is you sit down, and if you're trying to think of ways to do something, you'll write out what you want to do in the form of a question. You might say, how can I train for a marathon? And the first couple of questions, you just write the question out, and you try and answer it. I call it a daily 21 because I'd like you to do this every day, and also because I want you to give at least a minimum of 21 answers. You could do 20, but I find that 20 is such a round number that it's like what we talked about before, right? Where do you go to the top of the hill, or do you just go just a little bit past? What you're going to find is that the first couple of answers, you'll be like, okay, well, run every day, drink more water, eat better, exercise. You're going to have all these sort of generic answers. After 8 or 10, depending on the topic and who you are and how much you've done this, you're going to have some regular answers. After a while, you're going to have some so-so answers. You might even have some goofy answers. And if you have a goofy answer, write it down. If you have a funny answer, write it down, because if you don't write it down, it stays in your head and you keep thinking about it. You're like, that's really funny. But if you write it down, it's gone, and we can move on to thinking some better ideas. The goal here is to get completely clear in your mind for answers for this particular subject. And the first 10 or 15 or 18 answers may not be anything mind earth-shattering or mind-blowing. But it's generally when you get up into the high teens, it's 18, 19, 20, even 21. That's when all these ideas start happening, and it can be one where you're like, oh, that's it. And just the light bulb goes on, and you go from there. I don't want you to stop at 21. If you're doing a daily 21 and you go to 50, I've done that sometimes where you're like 50, 70, these ideas just keep flowing. You just got to keep going. Keep writing them down, writing them down, writing them down, writing them down. And then you can go and evaluate later. If it's silly, goofy, dumb, if it's repetitive, we've talked about this again before. If you think the same thought again, no, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Write it down a second time. Write it down a third time. Maybe it's telling you something if you're writing it down multiple times. Maybe that's your pet answer. Maybe that's your favorite. So just get it out, get it off your mind, and start getting rid of your favorite answers, and start thinking different answers, better answers, more efficient answers, whatever it is. Get them out of your mind and start thinking better ones. Something else that we can talk about, and it's everyone talks about this, is our mind maps. Mind maps have been used for years to describe things. The term was coined by a man named Tony Buzan, and he's a big mind expert, and he's written tons of books. If you get a chance, go ahead and check out some of his books. They're actually pretty cool. I've read a few of them. And what mind mapping really is it's supposed to be, this is the building, and I don't know, I think it actually kind of works, is instead of writing things down line after line after line, which I think is okay too, but you make these little circles, and you'll make a circle on, well, I don't know why I'm onto this running thing. I probably need to start running again. And but you write down the main idea, and you put a circle or a square or something around it, and then you have a line going off to a separate idea. And then whatever's related to that idea, you put around that idea. And then another idea here. And then another idea here. And I love doing mind maps. I use mind mapping software daily now. So I love using mind maps to get things out. It's a very cool system. I am going to demonstrate how I use mind maps in a few minutes. So stay tuned and we'll get into some mind mapping. I'll show you some software and all those cool things. Something else something you may not have heard of, and this is something that I learned from a man named Win Winger, is something called mind noting. And what a mind note is, and I'll just grab my recorder here. A mind note is when you actually have a little recorder, or you do something where you can even use your phone. Is when you're sitting there walking. I used to always do it when I was driving, but you turn on and you go for 10 minutes. You set a goal to go for 10 minutes. 10 minutes doesn't seem like a whole lot of time, but it's funny how fast the ideas can flow out of you. And then after 3 or 4 minutes, you're sitting there going, okay, do I turn off the recorder? Do I keep going? But you just keep going, and you just keep talking through it and talking through it and talking through it. And then that's when the cool ideas start to flow. I like doing mind noting. It's different, and that's why I like changing things up and breaking up the pace. The only downside to when you record things is you have to go back through and listen to it and extract it. But I do find I'm creative when I'm talking things out. So if you're a talker or a writer, and even if you think you're a writer, try the talking thing, because it may just change things up a little bit, give you some different ideas and a different method to extract those ideas. So there you have it. The different techniques, the mind mapping, so when you have all the crazy drawings all over the place, mind noting, taking 10 minutes to do an audio session, really, really cool idea. Something else you can do, then this is just pretty self-explanatory, is to write things out in a journal. People have used journals and notebooks and paper for years for this exact purpose. They'll write out, how their life's going, whether the wins, what's changing, what they need to do, but they'll also write down cool ideas. I've done this for years. I'll get into this in the next section, where for a long time I wrote down everything in my journal, and I have so many great ideas. I still love looking back because I've dated everything. So I've got a history of where I've gone. I have a history of the ideas I had back, 5, 10 or more years ago. It's a really, really, I think, amazing system, something you should consider as well. So if you don't want to do mind mapping, mind noting, or if you want to add this on, just grab a book, crack it open, and start writing out your thoughts, your ideas, what you want to do. Again, you can do your daily 21s in a book. I like keeping my daily 21s, so if I ever want to go back, I can go back and review it. Don't do it that often, but it's there if I ever choose to use it. Something else I want to just mention here too is, once you have all these ideas built up using these techniques, the next step now is going to be to decide whether you just leave the ideas where they are. It's nice to get them out of your head so you can think new and better thoughts, and you can oftentimes just leave the ideas where they are until you need them. You'll usually remember, you'll say, oh, remember that one day I was writing all that information down and I was thinking about, whatever it is, my job. You go back and you can review those things when you're planning on going and implementing some of those solutions. Or at that point, you might want to scan your list and say, okay, out of this 20 or 25 items, maybe 3 are good. I'm going to grab these 3, and I'm going to find the exact spot where they need to be in my plan to succeed, and go from there. So that's what you want to do, is decide what stays in just the niceness of your books and the paper or the computer, and what needs to be extracted and move from there on in. So I hope this all gives you a bit of an introduction to capture systems and using some sort of good capture system to help take your efforts and your success to the next level. Remember, there are 3 types of work, and you want to make sure you try and break it down either into doing one type of work all the time for different items, or work on one project and do all 3 phases of work for those. So again, the phases are creation, implementation, and completion. And again, making sure that you have some sort of system to get the ideas out of your head and onto paper. And again, that's where all the examples I gave you today will fit in. Whether it's going to be mindstorming, mind mapping, mind noting, all these mind phrases. But give it a shot, give it a try, see what works for you. If you find one works better than the others, hey, go for it. If something doesn't work for you, then get rid of it. That's what it's all about. It's trying a few different things, seeing what works and what doesn't. Until our next video, I'm Kevin Oxner.